In this episode, we shift from the craft of a single high-pressure message to the craft of guiding a whole group of people toward a decision when time, attention, and patience are limited. Meetings are often treated like a necessary evil in security work, but the truth is that decisive meetings can be one of the strongest tools you have for reducing risk and preventing recurring problems. When an organization is facing an incident, a policy disagreement, a resourcing conflict, or even just a confusing handoff between teams, a good meeting does not exist to talk about work, it exists to move work. The outcome you want is not a transcript of everything everyone said, but a clear set of decisions, owners, and next steps that leave the room with less ambiguity than it had when it entered. For brand new learners, this matters because security is deeply cross-functional, and you will repeatedly find yourself in rooms where the problem is less technical than it is human, organizational, and decision-shaped. Learning how to facilitate those rooms is one of the fastest ways to become useful, even before you master every technical detail. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Decisive meetings start before anyone joins the call or walks into the room, because the biggest source of meeting failure is arriving without a shared purpose. A meeting that is meant to decide something must be framed around a decision, not around a topic, because a topic can be discussed forever without changing anything. If the invitation or opening statement says something like "discuss access controls," you are likely to get a wide conversation with no finish line. But if it says "decide whether we will require multi-factor authentication for administrative access this quarter," people can aim their thinking at a specific endpoint. That shift also helps you choose who should be present, because decision meetings need the people who can commit resources or accept consequences, not just the people who have opinions. A common misconception is that including everyone makes decisions more fair, but in practice it often makes decisions impossible because accountability becomes fuzzy and the conversation gets pulled toward every edge case. Good facilitation is not about making sure every possible voice speaks equally. It is about making sure the right voices are heard at the right time so a decision can be made responsibly. Once you know the decision, the next step is to define what decision-ready means, because groups often get stuck arguing due to mismatched standards of evidence. Some people want perfect data, some want quick action, and some want to avoid committing at all because commitment creates exposure. If you do not set an expectation for what will count as sufficient information, you will drift into endless requests for more analysis and more research that never arrives in time. Decision-ready does not mean careless. It means the decision will be made with the best information available by a specific time, and then adjusted if new facts appear. In security, that is especially important because the environment changes and attackers do not wait for you to feel comfortable. A facilitator can set this tone by acknowledging uncertainty early, then narrowing the discussion to what is known, what is unknown, and what must be true for each option to be acceptable. When you do that, you are not forcing a decision blindly. You are shaping the uncertainty into something that can be handled. A decisive meeting also depends on a clear understanding of roles, even if you never say the words "role" out loud. Somebody needs to be able to make the final call. Somebody needs to be able to advise with technical or operational expertise, and somebody needs to capture what was decided in a way that will survive memory and emotion. If those roles are not clear, the meeting tends to devolve into either group consensus that produces a watered-down compromise or quiet deference where everyone waits for someone else to speak first. For beginners, it helps to think of facilitation as steering traffic rather than dominating the road, because your job is to keep ideas flowing in the right direction, not to be the loudest person. When you facilitate well, you create space for content experts to contribute while preventing the group from getting stuck in loops. This is also where credibility shows up, because people are more likely to accept facilitation when they believe you are being fair, accurate, and focused on outcomes rather than on ego. The opening minutes of the meeting matter more than most people realize because they set the mental boundaries for the rest of the time. A strong opening does three things in plain language. It states the decision being sought, it states the time boundary, and it states what will be produced by the end. Time boundaries are not about being rigid. They are about forcing prioritization so the group does not spend 20 minutes on context that could have been shared earlier. It also helps to name the constraint that is driving urgency, such as a compliance deadline, a risk exposure, an operational outage, or a dependency with another team. When you name the constraint, people understand why you are focusing, and they are less likely to interpret the focus as impatience. Another subtle but powerful move is to say what will happen if the group cannot decide, such as escalating to a specific leader or using a default choice, because the existence of a fallback can reduce stalling behavior. In many organizations, indecision is a hidden strategy, and a clear fallback makes that strategy less effective. As the meeting moves into discussion, you need a way to manage the difference between facts, interpretations, and preferences, because those get mixed together under pressure. Facts are things the group can agree are true. Interpretations are what people think the facts mean, and preferences are what people want to do about it. When a meeting becomes unproductive, it is often because people are arguing at different layers without realizing it, such as one person debating whether a risk is real while another person is already debating which mitigation is better. A facilitator can slow that down just enough to separate the layers and then reconnect them in a logical order. For example, you can summarize what has been observed, then ask whether anyone disputes the observation, then ask what the observation implies about risk, and only then move into options. This does not require jargon or formal method, just disciplined clarity. The result is a conversation that feels calmer and more rational, which makes it easier for decision-makers to commit. Another common failure mode is scope creep, where the meeting starts with a decision but ends up trying to solve everything connected to the decision. Security problems often have many related issues, and it can feel responsible to address them all, but trying to do that in one meeting usually means you decide nothing. The facilitator's skill is to keep the scope narrow while still respecting related concerns, which you can do by acknowledging them, capturing them, and assigning them to a follow-up path. That prevents people from feeling ignored, but it also prevents the group from getting dragged away from the decision. Beginners sometimes worry that this will make them seem dismissive, but in fact it often increases trust because it shows you can separate what must be decided now from what should be explored later. In a decisive meeting, the goal is not to answer every question. It is to answer the specific question the meeting exists to answer. When scope stays tight, time gets used on decision quality thinking rather than on wandering debate. Decision meetings also need options that are framed clearly, because people cannot choose well if the choices are fuzzy. A surprisingly effective technique is to restate each option as a simple sentence that includes the action and the consequence, so the group can compare them honestly. If one option is stated with optimistic language and another is stated with fear-based language, you are not comparing options, you are manipulating the outcome, sometimes unintentionally. It helps to standardize the way each option is presented by naming the expected benefit, the primary cost, and the key risk. In security, benefits often include reduced exposure, improved detection, or compliance alignment, while costs might include time, friction for users, or engineering effort. Risks can include disruption, incomplete coverage, or reliance on assumptions that may not hold. When you present options with balanced clarity, the decision-maker can weigh trade-offs rather than getting lost in persuasion. That is how facilitation supports the decision without hijacking it. You also have to handle disagreement in a way that moves forward, because decisive meetings are often decisive precisely because people disagree. A facilitator should treat disagreement as information rather than as conflict, because disagreement usually signals a real trade-off, a hidden constraint, or a different mental model of the situation. The trick is to surface the real disagreement rather than letting it hide behind vague objections. When someone says this will not work, that statement is too broad to act on. So your job is to ask what condition would need to be true for it to work or what specific failure they predict. When someone says we should not do this, you can ask what harm they are trying to prevent and whether that harm is more likely than the harm of doing nothing. These questions are not confrontational when asked with calm tone, and they help the group move from emotion to reasoning. Over time, the room learns that objections need to be specific and evidence-based, which increases the quality of decisions. One of the most valuable facilitation skills is summarizing in a way that creates alignment without erasing nuance. Summaries are not just polite recaps. They are control points where you can verify that the group shares the same understanding before you lock in a decision. A good summary captures the key facts, the key trade-offs, and where the group seems to be leaning, then asks for confirmation or correction. This prevents the meeting from advancing on false agreement, which happens when people nod along while holding different interpretations. It also gives quieter participants a chance to correct something without having to interrupt earlier debate. Under pressure, people often mishear or assume, and your summaries reduce the chance that a misinterpretation becomes an expensive action. A useful habit is to summarize whenever the conversation shifts from one phase to another, such as from context to options or from options to decision. That rhythm creates clarity and makes the meeting feel guided rather than chaotic. To actually land the decision, you need to recognize the moment when the group has enough information to choose, because groups will often keep talking even after the choice is clear. This happens because talking feels safer than committing, and because some people believe more discussion equals better outcomes. A facilitator can spot this and move the meeting into commitment by stating what appears to be the emerging decision and asking the decision-maker to confirm or adjust. If the decision-maker hesitates, you can ask what remaining uncertainty is blocking the decision and whether that uncertainty can be resolved within the meeting's time boundary. If it cannot, then the meeting must shift to deciding how to obtain the missing information and by when, rather than continuing to debate in the absence of it. Another technique is to propose a time box decision, where the group commits to an option for a defined period and agrees on the signals that would trigger reconsideration. This can be powerful in security because it converts paralysis into reversible action, and it encourages learning through observation. After the decision is made, the most important part is turning it into executable commitments, because a decision that is not translated into actions is just a preference. This is where you capture who owns what done means, and when progress will be checked. Ownership is not a vague notion of responsibility. It is a person or role who will ensure the work happens and who will report back. Done means the observable outcome that proves completion, not simply that someone tried. The check-in point matters because it creates a feedback loop that keeps the decision alive after the meeting ends. Many meetings fail not because the decision was wrong, but because no one tracked whether the decision was carried out. A decisive meeting ends with clarity that survives the next wave of distractions, and that clarity comes from explicit commitments that can be followed up. It is also important to close in a way that preserves trust, because even a good decision can leave people feeling unheard if you do not acknowledge their contributions. This does not mean rehashing the debate or apologizing for deciding. It means confirming what was decided, why it was decided, and what will happen next. When people understand the reasoning, they are more likely to support the outcome even if it was not their preferred choice. When they know there is a path for revisiting the decision if new information appears, they are less likely to sabotage it through passive resistance. This is especially relevant in security, where controls often create friction and where some teams fear that security decisions will be imposed without understanding operational reality. A facilitator can reduce that fear by making decisions transparent, bounded, and connected to measurable outcomes. Over time, that style turns meetings from political battles into practical coordination. As you develop this skill, you should expect to make mistakes and learn from them, because facilitation is a human craft, not a script. Sometimes you will invite too many people, sometimes you will miss a hidden stakeholder, and sometimes you will realize that what looked like a decision meeting was actually an information gathering meeting. The goal is to get better at sensing what the meeting truly needs and then guiding it toward the right outcome. If you can consistently clarify the decision, keep scope controlled, separate facts from interpretations, present options fairly, manage disagreement constructively, and convert choices into owned actions, you will find that teams start to move faster with less frustration. That is not just good management. It is a security capability, because the ability to make timely, accountable decisions is often what determines whether risks are reduced or allowed to grow. Decisive meetings create momentum, and momentum is what turns security intent into security reality.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.